When my son let his wife tell me I wasn't needed for Christmas, I almost lost it. But instead of crying, I smiled and said, "Perfect. I'm going to Hawaii. You can handle it. I'm not your nanny or your maid." He went pale, but the real surprise was still coming. They wanted to throw me away like yesterday's trash, but I was about to show them that some things you just can't get rid of. The scent of my famous apple pie filled the kitchen, a sweet, warm aroma that always brought a little slice of heaven into my world. My world, a quaint little home with a garden I'd lovingly tended for 30 years, was a refuge from the chaos of modern life. But lately, even this sanctuary felt like a battleground, a never-ending war fought with bills and bank statements. I sighed, dropping the stack of mail onto the kitchen counter with a weary thud. Another month, another pile of paper, reminding me that the world runs on money, not on heartfelt deeds or good intentions. Today wasn't just any morning, it was a help a friend kind of morning. My dear friend Martha was finally moving to a small coastal town to be closer to her grandchildren. I'd promised to help her pack, and I knew how much it meant to her. She was a woman who cherished family more than anything, a quality I admired and, frankly, envied. My own family, well, they were a more complicated affair these days. I had baked this pie especially for her. She always claimed it was the best thing she'd ever tasted, and she wasn't known for her false flattery. I was just about to grab my coat when the doorbell rang. I opened it to find my daughter-in-law, Sarah, standing there, an impossibly bright smile plastered on her face, like a neon sign in the middle of the day. Next to her, my son, Tom, stood with a kind of hunched-over posture, his eyes fixed on the doormat, as if it held the answers to the universe. He looked so uncomfortable, someone like the boy who used to run to me for a hug. A knot of unease tightened in my stomach. Something was off. "Hey, Mary," Sarah chirped, using my first name with a familiarity that always felt a bit too forced. I still remember the day she first called me ma'am with a sugary sweet politeness that hid an ice-cold distance. I gave them a weak smile and gestured for them to come in. "We just wanted to pop by and talk about the holidays," Tom mumbled, his voice so quiet I almost didn't hear him. Holidays? It was only mid-October. This wasn't a casual visit. This was the prelude to something I instinctively knew I wouldn't like. I offered them tea, but Sarah waved a dismissive hand. "Oh no, we're in a hurry. We just wanted to talk about Christmas." Christmas, the one day of the year I truly live for. I had always been the one to host, the one who made the house feel like a home, the one with the giant tree, the piles of perfectly wrapped gifts, and of course, my apple pie that vanished the moment it was set on the table. It was the joy on my grandchildren's faces, the warmth of the fire, the sound of laughter that made it all worthwhile. But this year, a chill had already set in. Without waiting for me to sit down, Sarah launched into her monologue. "So, Tom and I have decided to host Christmas this year at our place. I've invited all my family, my parents, my sister and her husband, and all 3 of their kids, and of course, a few of our friends." She spoke with a sense of entitlement, as if this was a done deal and my opinion was a mere afterthought. Tom, meanwhile, just sat there, fidgeting with a button on his shirt, a classic sign of his discomfort and shame. He had become a stranger, a man who couldn't even meet his own mother's gaze. I forced a tight-lipped smile. "That's a lovely idea, Sarah. It's so kind of you to take on such a big responsibility." The sarcasm was so thick I could practically chew on it. "In that case, I won't be coming." The smile vanished from her face. Her eyes widened. "What? Why not?" "Well," I said, leaning back in my chair, "if you're having so many people, I'd hate to be a bother. And besides, I have other plans." The lie tasted like freedom. "But it's Christmas," Sarah exclaimed. "How can you miss Christmas? It's a family holiday." At that moment, something inside me snapped. I stood up and walked to the mantelpiece where a cherished photograph of me and my children, Tom and Emily, stood proudly. We were all smiling, full of life and love. I looked from the photo to Tom, who was still avoiding my eyes, and then to Sarah. "Family, Sarah? You talk about family as if I'm some hired help you can simply cross off the list when it's no longer convenient. I've always hosted, I've always cooked, I've always cleaned, and now you're telling me I'm not even welcome at my own holiday? No, I don't think so." Sarah went pale. She glanced at Tom, expecting him to step in, to defend her, to say something, anything. But he remained silent. In his eyes, I saw not just guilt, but fear. Fear of his wife, fear of me. And in that moment, I realized he was no longer my son. He was a man held captive by a woman who saw me as an obstacle to be removed. "Mary, we didn't mean it like that," she stammered, but I cut her off. "I know exactly what you meant, Sarah. You wanted to make Christmas convenient for you without a single thought for my feelings. Well, let me tell you something. I'm not your maid, and I'm certainly not your babysitter for your guests. I am your mother, Tom. I'm the one who raised you, who taught you to walk, who comforted you when you fell, and now you can't even stand up for me?" My words hung in the air, heavy and sharp. The silence that followed was suffocating. I realized they hadn't just come to talk about Christmas. They had come to inform me that I was no longer needed, that my traditions, my efforts, my love, it all meant nothing. My heart ached, a deep, hollow pain. But then I remembered Martha waiting for me with her boxes, and I knew I had real friends who valued me. And I knew that I didn't need their holiday to be happy. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have somewhere to be," I said, grabbing my pie from the counter. "I'm off to see a friend who actually appreciates me. You two can handle it." I turned and headed for the door, leaving them standing in my living room in a silence I knew would soon be filled with Sarah's complaints and Tom's meek acquiescence. I walked out, a weight lifting off my shoulders as I felt the sting of their betrayal. I always thought my family was my fortress, but they were the ones who had built the walls that now kept me out. But you know what? I wasn't going to just sit there and cry. I was going to fight back, to find my own strength and dignity. And you, my friends, you won't want to miss what happens next. It will change everything. I hope you'll stick with me because what unfolds from here is the real story.
The cool autumn air hit my face as I stepped outside, a blessed relief from the suffocating tension inside my own home. I clutched the warm apple pie in my hands, a tangible piece of my effort and love, now a symbol of everything they were so casually dismissing. The leaves on the trees were starting to turn, a beautiful, fiery red and gold, but all I could see was the bleak gray of a betrayal that had just been laid bare. My mind was a kaleidoscope of memories, flashing back to a time when Christmas was magic and my son's love was a given, not a negotiation. I remembered him as a little boy, his face smudged with chocolate, proudly showing me a drawing of our family. Now, he couldn't even look me in the eye. He had become a stranger, a ghost in my own son's body, and the realization was a punch to the gut. I walked the 4 blocks to Martha's house, my feet feeling as heavy as my heart. When she opened the door, her bright smile instantly faded. "Mary, honey, what is it? You look like you've seen a ghost," she said, pulling me into a warm embrace. That was all it took. The dam broke, and the tears I'd been so desperately holding back came in a torrent. I buried my face in her shoulder, a grown woman clinging to her friend like a lost child. She led me to her kitchen, sat me down, and brewed a fresh pot of tea. Taking the eye from my hands, she gave me a knowing look. "This is for me?" she asked softly. I could only nod, my throat too tight to speak. "Mary, I know you. You don't cry unless something's truly broken. Tell me everything." And I did. I told her about Sarah's smug announcement, about the 15 people and the way she had so casually erased my role. I told her about Tom's silence, a silence that hurt more than any sharp word could. Martha listened, her own face a mask of quiet fury. "Oh, Mary, I'm so sorry. I knew she was a piece of work, but I never imagined she'd go this far." Her words weren't a platitude, they were a mirror, reflecting my own pain and anger back at me, validating every emotion I was feeling. She got it. She understood. And in that moment, her empathy was the only thing holding me together. We sat there for hours, the scent of her own packing boxes mixing with the lingering smell of my pie. She talked about her excitement for her new life by the sea, and I listened, letting her joy be a temporary balm for my wounded spirit. But as the sun began to set, a new feeling started to stir within me, something hot and defiant. I was not going to be a victim. I was not going to be the sad old woman they had cast aside. I was Meryl, a woman who had built a life with her own hands, who had a fierce love for her family, and who apparently had to fight for her own right to exist in it. I returned home that evening to an empty house that now felt utterly alien to me. It was too quiet, too still. I felt like a stranger in my own life. But the quiet also gave me clarity. They thought they could erase me? Fine, I would rewrite the script. I would prove to them, and more importantly to myself, that my worth wasn't tied to their whims. I fired up my laptop and went straight to a travel website. I had always dreamed of visiting Hawaii, of feeling the sand between my toes and the sun on my face. It was a fantasy, a distant dream I'd always put off for someday. Well, someday was now. No cooking, no cleaning, no ungrateful guests. Just me, a Mai Tai and a view of the Pacific. A much better plan than being someone's free labor. I found a travel package for a Christmas trip to Hawaii, complete with a beautiful ocean view room. I booked the flights and the hotel right there and then. A surge of power and exhilaration coursing through me. I was taking control. Just as I finished, my phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. "Mom, Tom is really upset. He thought we'd be together for Christmas. Please reconsider." The use of "mom" was a calculated jab, a manipulative little word she pulled out when she wanted something from me. The hypocrisy was astonishing. She wanted to guilt-trip me into doing her bidding, but she wouldn't even use my name. I smiled, a slow, cold smile. My fingers flew across the screen. "I've already reconsidered. I have other plans. Merry Christmas." I hit send and felt an immediate, profound sense of relief. It was my first real no in a long time, and it felt incredible. It wasn't just a rejection of their demands. It was a reclamation of my own life. The next day, as if the universe was a co-conspirator, I ran into Tom and Sarah at the bank. I had gone to withdraw money for my trip. They were in their car in the parking lot, and their faces dropped when they saw me. They expected me to approach, to apologize, to beg for a place at their table. But I just kept walking, my head held high, a confident stride that was new to me. I knew they were watching, their silent stares burning into my back. I didn't turn around. I had nothing to apologize for. I had no idea what lay ahead. I didn't know how they would react when I told them I was going to Hawaii, but I was ready for whatever came. I was no longer a victim. I was a fighter, and I was going to fight for my own happiness. And of course, I will share every detail with you. I have a feeling what happens next is even more shocking. This is the big reveal. Everything you've been waiting for is right here. Stay with me to see how I finally put them in their place.
The days that followed were a blur of defiant joy and quiet resolve. My house, once a place of bustling family gatherings, had become my personal fortress, my cocoon of self-preservation. I spent my time researching Hawaiian excursions, practicing my hula moves in front of the mirror with a ridiculous grin, and telling myself over and over that this was the best Christmas present I could ever give myself. My phone,
once a constant source of pings and notifications from my son and his wife, had fallen silent. The quiet was deafening at first, but with each passing day, it became a soothing balm. It was the sound of my own independence. One afternoon, I was at the grocery store, humming a tune as I picked out a particularly ripe avocado. I was still wearing a faint scent of the coconut lotion I'd been testing out, a little pre-trip indulgence. Just as I was about to put it in my cart, I heard my name. Mary? I turned and saw a familiar face from my past, Brenda, a woman I hadn't seen in years, one of Sarah's old acquaintances from her church group. Brenda's smile was as tight as a drum. She was the kind of person who always seemed to be evaluating you, and her eyes immediately scanned me from head to toe, lingering on my new, brighter blouse and my obviously relaxed demeanor. Brenda, hello," I said, trying to sound more cheerful than I felt. I had no patience for small talk, especially the kind that felt like an interrogation. "How are you?" She didn't answer right away. Instead, she leaned in conspiratorially. "I heard you're not coming to Christmas this year. Sarah is just so heartbroken." The words dripped with a saccharine sympathy that was more insulting than any direct accusation. Heartbroken? Sarah was about as heartbroken as a cat who just got a new can of tuna. "Oh, you heard that, did you?" I replied, my voice a little too sweet. "Well, you know how it is. Christmas is such a hassle. All that cooking, all that cleaning." I told her I was just too tired to do it all this year. Brenda's eyebrows shot up. "But I thought you loved doing it all. Sarah said you were just so overwhelmed with everything." There it was. The narrative had already been set. I wasn't just not coming. I was overwhelmed. The truth, as I'd known it, was being rewritten and spread through their social circles, turning me into some pathetic, frail old woman who couldn't handle the holiday. I felt a hot flush of indignation rise in my cheeks. Overwhelmed? Honey, the only thing I'm overwhelmed with is joy. I've booked myself a trip to Maui for Christmas. Sun, sand, and no dirty dishes. Now that's my kind of holiday. The look on Brenda's face was priceless. It was a perfect blend of shock and disbelief, a momentary rupture in the perfectly crafted lie she'd been told. For a fleeting second, I saw a flicker of something else, envy. It was a small victory, but it felt as good as a full-blown declaration of war. "Maui?" she stammered. "But what about the family? What about Tom and the kids?" "Oh, they'll be fine," I said with a shrug, tossing the avocado into my cart. "It's not like I'm their nanny or their maid. I'm a woman who earned her retirement and is finally going to enjoy it." I gave her a wide, disingenuous smile and wheeled my cart away, leaving her standing there in the produce aisle, her jaw slightly agape. I got back to my car, my heart pounding with a mixture of righteous fury and exhilaration. They were not just trying to exclude me. They were trying to define me, to make me a caricature of a sad, lonely mother who had been cast aside. But I wasn't that woman. I was the woman who had booked a trip to Hawaii. I was the woman who was going to spend Christmas drinking Mai Tais instead of basting a turkey. And I was the woman who, for the first time in a long time, felt a real sense of power. That evening, my phone finally rang. It was Tom. His voice was strained, and he sounded like he was calling from a hostage situation. "Mom, I heard you told Brenda you're going to Hawaii for Christmas." The accusation was clear in his tone, as if I had committed some grave crime. "Yes, I did," I said calmly. "It's a beautiful place, and I've always wanted to go." "But why didn't you tell me? Why did you have to tell everyone else?" "You mean, why did I have to tell a woman who would immediately go and tell you?" "Because I wanted to see you squirm a little, honey. It's what you get for being a coward." I heard a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line, and I knew Sarah was listening. "Mom, that's not fair," he said, his voice dropping to a low, defensive growl. "We were just trying to do something different this year. We didn't mean to hurt you."
didn't mean to hurt me," I scoffed. "Do you know what it felt like to have your wife tell me, to my face, that I wasn't needed? That 15 people was too many to include your own mother? I'm not a stray animal to be given a spare bone when it's convenient for you. I'm your mother." And you stood there and said nothing. Don't you ever dare tell me you didn't mean to hurt me again. The line went silent. I knew I had hit the mark. I had spent so long holding back, biting my tongue, and now the words were pouring out of me like a dam bursting. I wasn't just angry, I was heartbroken, and I was tired of pretending I wasn't. I'm not a guest, Tom. I'm family. Or at least, I used to be. But if this is what family means to you, then I'd rather be alone in a tropical paradise. I hope you and your 15 guests have a wonderful Christmas. I hung up before he could respond. I sat there for a long time, the silence now a comforting presence. The guilt I thought I would feel was completely absent. I had finally said my piece. I had finally stood up for myself. I knew this was far from over. I knew they would try to retaliate, to turn the tables on me, but for the first time, I wasn't afraid. I had a ticket to Maui and a newfound sense of self-respect, and I had you, my friends, to share this journey with. The situation is about to get much, much more complicated. This is the culmination. Everything you've been waiting for is right here. Stay with me to see how I finally put them in their place.
The silence after I hung up was the most satisfying sound I had heard in years. It was the sound of a woman taking back her own life. I knew Sarah would have her claws in Tom now, spinning a tale of my cruelty and selfishness. I could almost hear her shrill voice accusing me of abandoning my family, of being a cold, heartless mother. But I didn't care. Not anymore. Their opinions were as irrelevant as a moth in a hurricane. I was on a mission, a pilgrimage to find my own peace and happiness, and their petty manipulations were just background noise. The next few weeks were glorious. I started going to yoga classes, something I'd always wanted to do but never had time for. My body felt stronger, my mind clearer. I even found myself laughing out loud at my own clumsy attempts to hold a pose, a genuine, unburdened laugh that had been missing from my life for far too long. I spent my mornings walking through the park, breathing in the crisp autumn air and feeling the last remnants of my resentment start to crumble away. I was finally living for myself, not for the approval of others. One afternoon, I was at a local bookstore browsing the travel section for a good guide to Maui. I was in my element, picturing myself on a beach with a book in my hand. Then I heard a familiar voice. "Well, look who it is, the world traveler." I turned to see Sarah, looking like a bird of prey with a smug, knowing smile. Beside her stood my son, Tom, looking even more miserable than he had before. His shoulders were slumped and his eyes had a hollow look as if he hadn't slept in weeks. "Sarah, Tom," I said, my voice steady. "What a surprise." "We just wanted to see what you were up to," she said, her smile not reaching her eyes. "Tom was so worried about you after, you know." She trailed off, letting the implied drama hang in the air. "After my vacation planning, you mean?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. "Yes," she said, her voice dropping to a theatrical whisper. "We just can't believe you would do this to us, especially right before Christmas." I almost laughed. The audacity of this woman was truly something to behold. She was so good at playing the victim, at making me out to be the villain in a story she had written herself. I looked at Tom, who was still staring at the floor. He was a man caught between two worlds, and he had chosen the wrong one. My heart ached for the boy he used to be. "Sarah, you told me I wasn't needed. I'm just taking your advice.
It's really that simple. But we were just kidding, she said, her voice rising in a squeak of indignation. It was just a little joke. You took it all so seriously. Her face was flushed now, her carefully constructed facade beginning to crack. A joke? I repeated, my voice ice cold. You called my son a coward for not standing up for me, and you're telling me it was a joke? I turned to Tom. Is that what this was, Tom? A joke? Because I don't remember laughing. I remember feeling like a piece of furniture you were selling on a garage sale, useless, old, and ready to be thrown out. Tom finally looked up, his eyes filled with a mixture of pain and shame. Mom, I'm sorry. The words were barely a whisper, but they were the first true apology I had heard from him in a long time. Sarah's face contorted in a silent snarl, but she said nothing. She couldn't. I had taken away her ability to control the narrative. I had exposed her cruel joke for what it was, a callous and deliberate act of exclusion. Don't be sorry, Tom, I said, my voice softening just a little. Just do better. I turned back to Sarah, a triumphant glint in my eye. And as for you, Sarah, I hope you have a wonderful time hosting Christmas for your 15 people. I'm sure it will be a night to remember. As for me, I'll be celebrating Christmas with a stranger in a different country, but at least I know that person will value my company. I picked up a travel book and held it up, a silent, powerful victory. I'm going to find my own family now, a family that I can choose for myself. I left them standing there, in the middle of the bookstore, two people who had everything but understood nothing about what truly mattered. I walked out into the cool evening air feeling lighter than I had in years. I had faced them, I had spoken my truth, and I had not backed down. I knew this was far from over, but for the first time, I felt like I was winning. I had a plan, I had my dignity, and I had my ticket to Maui. And the best part? The real surprise was still to come. You won't believe what happens next. This is the culmination. Everything you've been waiting for is right here. Stay with me to see how I finally put them in their place.
The confrontation at the bookstore had been an adrenaline shot right to the heart of my resolve. It was proof that they hadn't just forgotten about me. They were actively trying to control the narrative, to turn me into a pitiful figure who couldn't handle the holidays. But their little performance had backfired spectacularly. I had called them out, exposed their emotional cruelty, and now the power was mine. The small, delicious victory of seeing their shock was all the fuel I needed to keep my momentum. I didn't just feel a sense of freedom, I felt a sense of purpose. My trip to Maui wasn't just a vacation anymore, it was an act of defiance, a public declaration of my self-worth. With Christmas a little over a month away, the holiday frenzy started to kick into high gear. While others were stressing over gift lists and menu planning, I was happily shopping for a new swimsuit and a wide-brimmed hat. I was in a whole new world. I spent my afternoons at the local spa, treating myself to a massage and a facial, something I had never done before, always putting everyone else's needs before my own. The masseuse, a sweet young woman named Chloe, told me I had a glow about me, and for the first time in years, I believed her. My newfound happiness, however, seemed to act as a beacon for Sarah's disapproval. She had apparently taken it upon herself to monitor my social media, a fact I found out in the most ridiculous way possible. I had posted a picture of my freshly manicured nails, a deep, vibrant coral color, holding a brochure for a catamaran tour in Maui. It was a small act of rebellion, but a very satisfying one. Within minutes, my phone buzzed with a comment from Sarah. I hope you're enjoying your selfish vacation. While we're busy preparing for the family Christmas, we'll be thinking of you. The emoji at the end was a smiling face with a halo. The sheer audacity of it left me speechless. She was trying to guilt trip me through a public forum. The irony of her calling my trip selfish after her own self-centered holiday plan was a level of gaslighting so profound it was almost impressive. I decided not to respond. My silence would speak louder than any argument I could ever make. But Sarah was not the kind of person who could handle being ignored. The next day, I got a call from my sister-in-law, a distant relative I rarely spoke to. She was calling, she said, because she was concerned. "Sarah told me you're not coming to Christmas. Is everything okay? She said you've been so stressed and that you're just not yourself lately." I knew what this was. Sarah was orchestrating a smear campaign, trying to turn my entire extended family against me, painting me as the unstable matriarch who had abandoned her family in their time of need. The only time of need, of course, was their need for a free chef and a babysitter. I took a deep breath. This was a new level of emotional manipulation, and I had to be careful not to fall into her trap. "Yes, I'm doing wonderfully," I told my sister-in-law, my voice as calm as a summer lake. "I've been planning a long overdue trip to Hawaii for the holidays. It's something I've always wanted to do." "Hawaii?" she said, her voice betraying a hint of genuine surprise. That's a bit much, isn't it? Sarah said you were just too frail to handle the holiday." "Frail?" I scoffed. "The only thing I'm too frail to handle is emotional abuse and ungrateful people. I decided to trade in my apron for a lei and my turkey baster for a cocktail." The line went silent for a moment. I could almost hear the gears turning in her head as she tried to reconcile Sarah's narrative with my breezy, unapologetic confidence. "Well, I just hope you know what you're doing. A family is a family." "You're right. And I'm going to spend my Christmas with my chosen family, a bartender in Maui. I think he'll appreciate me a lot more." I hung up, feeling a surge of satisfaction. The more they tried to control me, the more I was able to stand my ground. This battle had escalated from a simple argument to an all-out war of public opinion. Sarah was a master manipulator, and she was using every tool at her disposal to turn everyone against me. But I had an advantage she didn't: the truth. I was acting out of self-respect, not out of spite. I was choosing happiness over obligation, and there was nothing they could do to stop me. One day, I received a package in the mail. It was a box of old, tattered aprons and a cookbook of traditional Christmas recipes. On top was a note in Sarah's handwriting. "Merry Christmas, Mom. Just wanted to remind you of what you're missing. We'll be thinking of you and your poor, lonely Christmas." My blood ran cold. The sheer cruelty of it. It wasn't just a passive-aggressive gift. It was a psychological jab, a twisted reminder of the role they expected me to play. I stood in my kitchen, holding the box, a wave of pain and rage washing over me. This was it. This was the line in the sand. I was no longer just a woman taking a vacation. I was a woman fighting for her soul. This wasn't just about Christmas anymore. It was about everything. This escalation of the conflict was a turning point. It had become a full-blown war, and I knew I couldn't just sit back and let them win. I had to show them, and the world, that a woman of a certain age is not to be discarded. I had to prove that my worth was not tied to their approval, and that I was capable of so much more than they ever gave me credit for. I was going to turn this jackalogical game on its head. I knew what I had to do, but it was going to require something more than just booking a trip. It was going to require a final, definitive act of defiance. This is the culmination. Everything you've been waiting for is right here. Stay with me to see how I finally put them in their place. The box of aprons and the smug note from Sarah sat on my kitchen table, a monument to their petty cruelty. It wasn't just a passive-aggressive gift. It was a psychological weapon, a twisted reminder of the role they expected me to play. I stood there, holding the tattered aprons, and for the first time since this whole saga began, I felt the sharp sting of tears. They weren't tears of sadness, but of pure, unadulterated fury. This was no longer just about a vacation or a Christmas dinner. This was a war for my identity. They wanted me to feel small, worthless, and forgotten, a relic of a past they were so eager to leave behind. But I was not a relic. I was a woman with a pulse, a mind, and a fire in her belly. I looked at the note again, the little smiley face with a halo, and a cold, hard resolve set in. I would not let them win. I would not let them define me by their own twisted standards. I walked over to my laptop and opened a new document. My hands, still trembling slightly from the rage, flew across the keyboard. This was my retaliation, my weapon of choice. I began to write. It wasn't a letter or an email. It was a story.
A story about a woman who was kicked out of her own family, a story of betrayal, and a story of a Christmas trip that changed everything. I knew that Sarah and Tom's social circle was built on a foundation of gossip and appearances. They would do anything to look good in front of their friends, to maintain the facade of a perfect family, and that's exactly what I was going to use against them. I started my story from the very beginning, the scent of my apple pie, the sudden unwanted visit from my son and his wife, the 15 people, and the final crushing blow of being told I wasn't needed. I described my son's cowardly silence and Sarah's theatrical heartbreak. I detailed the psychological warfare of the frail narrative and the final brutal insult of the box of aprons. I wrote with a raw, unfiltered honesty that I had never allowed myself before. I poured my heart and soul into every word, my anger giving me a clarity I had known I possessed. I wasn't just writing about my own pain, I was writing about a universal truth, the way some families can turn on their own, the way kindness can be misunderstood for weakness. I wanted my story to resonate with anyone who had ever felt unappreciated or taken for granted. I wanted them to see Sarah and Tom for who they really were. After a few hours, the story was complete. It was a powerful, emotional, and scathingly honest account of a family torn apart by selfishness. I read it over one more time, making sure every detail was perfect. Then, with a deep breath and a defiant grin, I created a new blog and posted the story. I titled it, How I Took My Christmas Back from the Grinches. The title was a little cheesy, I admit, but it was catchy, and most importantly, it was all mine. I didn't just post it and forget about it. I shared it on every social media platform I had with a simple caption, for anyone who needs to be reminded that you are not a doormat. The response was immediate and overwhelming. My phone, which had been so silent for weeks, began to buzz with notifications. Comments and messages poured in from friends, distant relatives, and even complete strangers. I can't believe they did that. You go, girl. This is so relatable. The support was a tidal wave, washing away the last remnants of my pain and self-doubt. It was a validation I didn't even realize I was craving. The story was being shared and reposted, a testament to the power of a good narrative and the universal human experience of being wronged. I knew it was only a matter of time before Sarah and Tom saw it. My heart pounded with a mix of fear and exhilaration. This was a new kind of confrontation, a public one, where I had the upper hand. I was no longer fighting them on their turf. I was fighting on mine, and I had a whole army of strangers on my side. A few hours later, my phone rang. It was Tom. His voice was not strained or defensive this time. It was filled with a cold, simmering rage. "Mom, what the hell is this? What do you think you're doing?" The change in his tone was shocking. The timid boy was gone, replaced by a furious, entitled man. "I'm telling my side of the story, Tom, something you and Sarah didn't bother to ask for. You're humiliating us. You're making us look like monsters." "I'm just telling the truth, Tom, and if the truth makes you look like a monster, then maybe you should have thought about that before you acted like one." I hung up. I knew the battle was far from over. This was just the beginning of their retaliation. But for the first time, I wasn't afraid. I had faced them, I had spoken my truth, and I had been heard. I had taken back my power, and I had found my voice. The best part? The real surprise was still to come. You won't believe what happens next. This is the culmination. Everything you've been waiting for is right here. Stay with me to see how I finally put them in their place.
My phone didn't stop ringing for 3 days straight after I posted the story. My son, Tom, alternated between furious voicemails and pleading texts. Sarah's friends, a flock of perfectly coiffed vultures, tried to slide into my DMs with thinly veiled insults, disguised as concerns about my mental health. I ignored them all.
My story had gone viral in a way I could never have anticipated. It was a digital wildfire, and every share, every comment of support was another bucket of gasoline. I had tapped into a universal well of frustration, a silent scream from every person who had ever felt unappreciated by their family. The comment section was a therapeutic symphony of shared experiences, a digital support group I hadn't known I needed. My favorite comment, and the one I screenshotted and read every morning, was from a woman named Karen. "My kids tried to pull a similar stunt with my 60th birthday," she wrote. "You go, Meryl. You're a hero to all of us. I'm taking notes." Karen's comment gave me more strength than any empty apology from my son ever could. I wasn't alone. I was part of a movement. The retaliation from Sarah and Tom was, as expected, swift and predictable. They tried to get my story taken down from the blog site, claiming it was harassment and defamation. But the site's administrators, after reviewing the post, sided with me. They said my story was a personal account, an expression of my feelings, and didn't violate any of their terms of service. Another victory. I imagined Sarah in her perfect pink coat, screaming at her laptop, unable to control a narrative that had spiraled so far beyond her grasp. The thought was delicious. Christmas was a week away. My suitcase was packed, my passport was ready, and my ticket to paradise was secured. But the sweetest part was yet to come. I received an email from a major news outlet. They had seen my story, they said, and they were interested in doing a piece on me, a segment about the woman who took back Christmas. They wanted to interview me live on national television right before the holidays. My heart leapt into my throat. This wasn't just a win. This was a complete, mind-blowing, cinematic victory. This was the moment I could expose them not just to their small social circle, but to the entire country. I agreed to the interview, of course. I knew this was my one chance to tell my side of the story, without Sarah's interruptions or Tom's cowardly silence. I was going to be the voice for every parent who had ever been taken for granted by their family. The news crew arrived at my house 2 days later. The cameras, the lights, the hushed voices of the producers, it all felt so surreal. They set up the shot in my living room, right in front of the fireplace where so many Christmases had been shared. I was told to sit in my favorite armchair, the one I had sat in for decades while watching my children open their presents. The symbolism wasn't lost on me. The interviewer, a kind woman named Jessica, began with a few warm-up questions. "Mary, your story has resonated with millions of people. Can you tell us, in your own words, what happened?" I took a deep breath, looked directly into the camera, and began my tale. I talked about the apple pie, about the 15 people, about being told I wasn't needed. I spoke with a quiet dignity, a calm that belied the storm raging inside me. I didn't yell or cry. I simply stated the facts. The truth was so much more powerful than any dramatics. "And what do you say to those who say you're just being selfish?" Jessica asked, her voice soft. I smiled. "I say that selfishness is telling your mother she's not wanted in her own home so you can host a bigger party. Selfishness is pretending to be heartbroken while you're busy trying to slander a person online. I say that I'm not being selfish, I am being brave. I am teaching my children that a parent's love is not a tool to be used and discarded. And I'm going to Hawaii to find my own peace." The camera's red light was on, and I knew millions of people were watching. I hoped Sarah and Tom were among them. I hoped they saw the woman they had tried to break, now sitting on national television with her head held high. I hoped they saw that they had not broken me, they had simply set me free. The camera lights were blinding, but I didn't flinch. I was a veteran of a different kind of war, one fought with emotional barbs and passive-aggressive gifts. I was a woman who had spent a lifetime making herself small for the comfort of others. And now, for the first time, I was taking up space on national television. I was a force of nature, and my story was my hurricane. I saw the producer giving me a thumbs up from behind the camera, and I knew I was delivering a performance that was not only honest, but also deeply compelling. I was laying bare the quiet cruelty that so many people face, a silent epidemic of family entitlement and emotional neglect. My words were a weapon, and they were hitting their mark. Jessica, the interviewer, was a professional, but I could see the genuine empathy in her eyes. She wasn't just doing a job. She was listening, really listening. She asked about my son, and for a moment, my voice wavered. "I love my son," I said, my voice soft. "I always will. But love isn't a blank check. It's not an excuse for bad behavior. I taught him to be a good man, and I guess I just forgot to teach him that his mother's heart is not a doormat." The words hung in the air, heavy with a truth that transcended my own story. They were a message to every child who had ever taken a parent for granted. As the interview drew to a close, Jessica asked the final question. "Mary, what do you hope people take away from your story?" I looked directly into the camera, knowing that this was my chance to deliver the final blow. "I hope they see that a family is not just a place you go for a free meal or a babysitter. It's a place where you're respected, where you're valued, and where you're loved, flaws and all. And I hope they see that it's never too late to take your life back. It's never too late to say no. And it's never too late to book a flight to Maui." I gave a little smile, a secret little triumph, and the camera lights went off. The next day, my phone rang. I saw the caller ID and almost dropped the phone. It was my son, Tom. I answered, my heart pounding in my chest. "Mom," he said, his voice raw and shaky, I just saw the interview. It was a lot." "What did you expect, Tom?" I asked, my voice still guarded. "You and Sarah made me a character in a story, and I just gave the world the rest of the script." He was silent for a moment, and I could almost hear him trying to find the words. "Mom, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I didn't realize." The words trailed off, but I knew what he meant. He hadn't realized the full weight of his actions until he saw them laid bare for the entire world to see. "It's not my forgiveness you need, Tom," I said, a little more gently. "It's a change in your heart. I want you to be the man I raised you to be, the man who would never let anyone disrespect his mother." He started to cry, and I could hear Sarah screaming something in the background. "I have to go, Mom," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "But I'll call you later. I promise." He hung up, and the silence that followed was different from any I had ever known. It was not the silence of abandonment or neglect. It was the silence of hope. But the real drama was yet to unfold. A few hours later, I received an email from my daughter, Emily. We hadn't spoken in months, not since she had sided with Sarah and Tom and saying I was being dramatic. The email was short and to the point. "Mom," it read, "I saw the interview. I'm so sorry. I was wrong. I'm coming to see you." My hand trembled as I read the words. My daughter, the one I had thought was lost to me, was coming back. My heart, which I had thought was a fortress, cracked open and a wave of pure, unadulterated love washed over me. The doorbell rang. It was Martha. She had a bottle of champagne and a huge, tearful smile. "I saw it all, Mary," she said, pulling me into a hug. "You were incredible. You were a hero." I smiled, feeling the warmth of her hug and the love of a true friend. I had started this journey alone, but I had found a community of supporters, a lifeline of empathy, and a renewed sense of self-worth. My trip to Maui was days away, but for the first time, I didn't care if I went or not. I had already found my paradise. And the best part? The morning of my flight to Maui was a whirlwind. My daughter, Emily, arrived on my doorstep with the huge bouquet of white lilies, her eyes red and swollen. We embraced in a hug that was a quiet conversation of its own, a silent apology and a silent acceptance. "I'm so sorry, Mom," she whispered into my shoulder. "I should have known better." We sat in my kitchen, drinking coffee and talking for hours. She confessed to me that Sarah had been poisoning the well for years, telling her I was becoming difficult and senile, a burden on the family. The truth was a painful revelation, but it was also a cleansing one. It was the moment I realized that my sons and daughters' distance wasn't a reflection of my character, but a result of Sarah's manipulations. My phone, which had been buzzing with notifications, finally fell silent. I checked it and saw that my story had been viewed and shared by a massive number of people. It had even been picked up by a few more minor news outlets. My simple act of defiance had become a public phenomenon, and the shame must have been too much for Sarah to bear. A quick look at her social media showed that her profiles were gone, as if she had been erased from the digital world. And I was the one who had done it. The limousine I had booked to the airport arrived. Emily hugged me one last time, promising to call me every day. As I sat in the back of the car, I felt a sense of peace that was so profound it was almost overwhelming. I had started this journey with a broken heart, a suitcase full of clothes, and a ticket to paradise. But I had ended up with so much more. I had found my voice, my courage, and my dignity. I arrived at the airport and checked in, feeling a sense of anticipation I hadn't felt in years. I was in the middle of a terminal, a sea of bustling strangers, when I saw him, my son, Tom. He was standing near a gate, a small suitcase in his hand, and he looked different. He was no longer the hunched-over, defeated man who had sat in my living room. He was a man with a purpose, with a look of quiet resolve on his face. He saw me, and for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, he smiled. He walked over to me, and my heart pounded in my chest. "Mom," he said, his voice a little shaky, I have something I need to tell you. I left Sarah." The words hit me like a ton of bricks. I had always hoped he would see the light, but I never expected it to happen so soon. "I've been a coward, Mom," he continued, tears welling up in his eyes. "I let her treat you like dirt. I let her turn our family into a business transaction, and I can't live with myself anymore. I'm so sorry." I didn't know what to say. I just stood there, staring at him, my own eyes filling with tears. "And," he said, taking a deep breath and looking me in the eye, "I'm coming with you." My jaw dropped. "What? Tom, you can't be serious." "I am," he said, a small, genuine smile on his face. "I'm not going back to her. I'm going to Hawaii with you. I'm going to make things right. I'm going to be the son you deserve." I was so overwhelmed with emotion that I couldn't speak. My son had finally found the courage to stand up to his wife, to leave a life that was making him miserable, and to choose me. The final definitive act of defiance was his. He was taking back his life, just like I had taken back mine. We sat on the plane together, side by side, and for the first time in years, we talked. We talked about his childhood, about the things he regretted, about the man he wanted to be. He told me that my interview had been a wake-up call, a slap in the face that he desperately needed. He had been blind, so caught up in Sarah's web of manipulation that he couldn't see the truth. But now he could, and it was all because of my courage, because of my defiance. I had lost a daughter-in-law, and I had gained my son back. The story was not over, of course. We had a lot of work to do. But for now, as the plane took off and the world below us became a tiny speck, I felt a sense of peace and joy that was so pure, so real, that I knew I had already won. I had not just taken back my Christmas, I had taken back my family, my son, and my life. The final triumphant chapter was just beginning. It was not a grand victory, but a quiet, personal one, a moment of profound transformation. This is the end of my story. I hope you've enjoyed it as much as I have enjoyed telling it. And if you ever find yourself in a similar situation, remember my words. A parent's love is not a doormat. It's a gift. And it's never too late to take your life back.
The journey to Hawaii was more than just a flight. It was a pilgrimage of healing. Tom and I talked for hours, the kind of deep, honest conversation we hadn't had since he was a teenager. He confessed that Sarah's manipulation had been a slow poison, isolating him from me and from his own sense of self-worth. He had been so caught up in her manufactured world of appearances that he couldn't see the reality of what was happening. My interview, he said, was the cold slap of truth he desperately needed. He had seen the man he had become, a man he didn't even recognize, and he was horrified. He told me he had finally stood up to Sarah, telling her he couldn't live like this anymore. He had packed a bag and walked out, leaving her and her self-serving version of family behind. We arrived in Maui to the warm embrace of the island air, a stark contrast to the chilly autumn back home. The hotel was beautiful, our room had a stunning view of the ocean, and for the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of complete peace. The days that followed were a blur of sun, sand, and genuine connection. We went on the catamaran tour I had planned, and I taught Tom to hula, a goofy, joyful lesson on a quiet beach. We didn't talk about Sarah or the Christmas they were likely having without us. We simply enjoyed each other's company, rediscovering the easy, loving bond we had once shared. One morning, as we were having breakfast on our balcony, Tom looked at me, his eyes full of gratitude. "Mom," he said, "I've been thinking. I want to tell you something. I was never a good son. I took you for granted. I let her walk all over you. I'm so sorry. I want to spend the rest of my life making it up to you." My heart swelled with a love so profound it hurt. "Honey," he said, "you don't have to. You've already made it up to me. You're here. You're my son again. That's all I've ever wanted." Our time in Hawaii was a new beginning. We were no longer a broken family. We were a family in the process of rebuilding. We had faced the darkness of betrayal and emotional neglect, and we had found our way back to each other. I had found my voice, my courage, and my dignity, and my son had found his way back to the man I knew he could be. I realized that my trip to Maui wasn't just a vacation. It was an act of profound self-love and an unexpected catalyst for change. The real victory wasn't a public shaming or a grand gesture of revenge. It was a quiet, personal one, a moment of profound transformation. My story had started with a Christmas that I was told I couldn't have, but it ended with the greatest Christmas gift of all, my son, my daughter, and a family that was finally whole again. I had taken my life back, and I had done it with grace, dignity, and a whole lot of sarcasm. And that, my friends, is a Christmas story worth telling.